Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. You are watching 5 W's of English literature. My name is Musarat and I will provide you easy, useful and interesting information about English literature using 5 W's. Today's captions are what, where and when. In the caption of what, we will see what does mean by the age of English literature. In the captions of where and when, we will see when and where did English literature start. What does mean by the age of English literature? Students of English literature are familiar by the term age of English literature, but many students don't know the meaning of this term. Here is the meaning of this term. When we study the history of English literature from the earliest to modern times, we find that it has passed through certain definite phases, each having marked characteristics. These phases may be termed as ages or periods, which are named by different criteria. For example, named after the central literary figure, we have the age of Chaucer, the age of Shakespeare, the age of Milton. Named after the important rulers of England, we have the Elizabethan age, the Victorian age. Named after the certain important historical eras, we have the medieval period, the Anglo-Saxon period, the Anglo-Norman period. Named after the centuries by some literary historians, we have the 18th century literature, the 20th century literature. These ages and periods naturally overlap each other and they are not to be followed strictly, but it is essential to keep them in mind in order to follow the growth of English literature and its salient and distinctive characteristics during the various periods of its development. Friends, English literature has developed over the course of more than 1400 years and it is consisted of approximately 9 periods. So it is not possible to cover the complete history of English literature in one video. So I have given a brief description of each period and moreover I have underlined the important events of each period. So please pay great attention to the underlined words. Let's start the history of English literature. First period of English literature is Old English literature or the Anglo-Saxon period, started from the year 450 to 1066. This is the earliest phase of English literature. It started with Anglo-Saxon literature of the Angles and Saxons, the ancestors of the English race. We have about 400 surviving manuscripts from that period. The works of this period include genres such as epic poetry, hagiography, sermons, Bible translations, chronicles, riddles. The most famous work in Old English literature is Beowulf. Beowulf is written by an anonymous writer. It has achieved national epic status in England. It is set in Scandinavia and it is dated between the 8th and the early 11th century. Second period of English literature is Middle English literature or the Anglo-Norman period or the age of Chaucer, started from the year 1066 to 1500. After the Norman conquest of England in 1066, the written form of the Anglo-Saxon language became less common. Dominant literary languages in England were French and Latin. The English spoken after the Normans came is known as Middle English. Famous persons of this age are William Langland, Geoffrey Chaucer, author of the Canterbury Tales. Chaucer is also called the father of English poetry. Another important event of this age is the invention of the printing press by Johannes Gutenberg in 1439. Third period of English literature is the English Renaissance period, started from the year 1500 to 1660. First part of this period is called Elizabethan period or the age of Shakespeare, started from the year 1558 to 1603. Renaissance, meaning rebirth, was a cultural and artistic movement in England dating from the late 15th to the 17th century. Started from Italy, the Renaissance period brought the revival of learning, and it denotes the gradual enlightenment of human mind after the darkness of the Middle Ages. The most noteworthy achievement during this period was in the field of drama. Poetry in the Renaissance took a new trend. It was the poetry of the new age of discovery, enthusiasm, and excitement. Prose began to be used as a vehicle for various forms of amusement and information. The reign of Queen Elizabeth I is of remarkable importance, which is why the Renaissance period is also called the Elizabethan period or the Golden Age. The Elizabethan era in the second half of the 16th century is usually regarded as the height of the English Renaissance. Famous persons of this period are Henry Howard, Earl of Surrey, introduced the sonnet from Italy into England in the early 16th century. William Shakespeare stands out in this period as a poet and playwright as yet unsurpassed. This is why this age is also called the Age of Shakespeare. Shakespeare wrote 154 sonnets, 37 plays, including genres of tragedies, comedies, and histories. Edmund Spenser wrote The Faerie Queene, an epic poem and fantastical allegory. Sir Philip Sidney, a prominent poet, wrote The Defense of Poetry. University wits were the other prominent authors in this age. The university wits is a phrase used to name a group of late 16th century English playwrights and pamphleteers who were educated at the universities, Oxford or Cambridge, and who became popular writers. Prominent members of this group were Christopher Marlowe, Robert Greene, Thomas Nash, John Lilly, Thomas Lodge, George Peele, Thomas Kidd. Second part of the English Renaissance period is called Jacobean period, started from the year 1603 to 1625. Francis Bacon belongs both to the Elizabethan and Jacobean periods. Bacon is the master of the aphoristic style. Bacon is best known for his essays and Henry VII. Ben Jonson, the poet and dramatist, was the leading literary figure of the Jacobean era. Jonson's comedies include Volpone and Bartholomew Fair. Fourth period of English literature is the Puritan Age or the Age of Milton, started from the year 1600 to 1660. This period is also called the Age of Milton. The Puritan movement is marked by the rebirth of moral nature of man. It aimed at making men honest and free. However, due to the severe religious principles, poetry became metaphysical. John Milton was the noblest representative of the Puritan spirit. Milton is best known for his epic poem Paradise Lost. John Donne was the chief advocate of the metaphysical school. Fifth period of English literature is the Restoration Age or the Age of Dryden, started from the year 1660 to 1700. This phase in the history of English literature is called Restoration period, as monarchy was restored in England and Charles II came back to England from his exile in France and became the king. With his arrival, a wave of licentiousness and frivolity swept the country. Consequently, the Elizabethan spirit, lust for adventure, and knowledge all became things of the past. John Dryden was an influential English poet, literary critic, and playwright of the Restoration period, to such a point that the period came to be known as the Age of Dryden. Dryden's greatest achievements were in satiric verses like the mock heroic Macflecknoe. Sixth period of the English literature is the 18th century literature. First part of this period is called Augustan literature or the Age of Pope, started from the year 1700 to 1750. This period reflected the worldview of the Age of Enlightenment or Age of Reason, a scientific and rational approach to all disciplines of life. It is also called the Classical Age in literature, as the writers of the 18th century in England tried to follow the simple and noble methods of the great ancient writers. Alexander Pope. In this period, the mock heroic was at its zenith, and Pope's Rape of the Lock and the Dunciad are still considered to be the greatest mock heroic poems ever written. That's why this period is also called the Age of Pope. This period saw the emergence of English novel. Daniel Defoe wrote Robinson Crusoe. Jonathan Swift started the new type of prose that was satire. Jonathan Swift wrote the satire Gulliver's Travels. Second part of the 18th century literature is called the Age of Sensibility or the Age of Johnson, started from the year 1750 to 1798. This period is known as the Age of Sensibility, but it is also sometimes described as the Age of Johnson. Samuel Johnson, often referred to as Dr. Johnson, was an English essayist, literary critic, biographer, and editor. Johnson's A Dictionary of the English Language had a far-reaching effect on modern English. The Romantic Age is the seventh period of English literature, started from the year 1798 to 1837. The Romantic Age is the most fruitful period in the history of English literature. This movement started against the classical school of thought and was marked by the publication of the lyrical ballads by Wordsworth and Coleridge in 1798. Earlier, the head controlled the heart. Now, the heart controls the heart. These were the watchwords of this age. No age in English literature has produced poets as those belonging to this age. The French Revolution and reaction against Industrial Revolution were important influences on the political thinking of many of the Romantic poets. Many poetic giants belonged to this age like Wordsworth, Coleridge, Keats, Shelley, Byron, and William Blake. Eighth period of English literature is the Victorian Age, started from the year 1837 to 1900. In the Victorian era, the novel became the leading literary genre in English. Issues like child labor and the plight of everyday working class were highlighted in the novels of Charles Dickens, who belonged to the Victorian era. Thomas Hardy wrote Tales of the D'Urbervilles. Charles Dickens wrote David Copperfield. Leading poets of the Victorian age are Alfred Lord Tennyson, Robert Browning. On number 9, we have the 20th century literature. First part of this period is the modern literature, started from the year 1901 to 1922. The modern age in English literature started from the beginning of the 20th century. Modern poetry exercised great freedom in the choice of themes under the sense of disillusionment with the Victorian age. Gone were the days when it was believed that the job of the poet was only to create beauty. They wrote both about the beautiful and twisted things, about human feelings, about the sad realities, about world wars, and about pessimism. The movement was influenced by the ideas of Charles Darwin, Friedrich Nietzsche, Karl Marx, and the psychoanalytic theories of Sigmund Freud. Leading poets of the 20th century literature are T.S. Eliot, author of The Waste Land, W.B.G. Yeats, and W.H. Auden. Leading authors of the 20th century literature are Joseph Conrad, Rudyard Kipling, James Joyce, Virginia Woolf, and Aldous Huxley. Second part of the 20th century literature is the postmodern literature, started from the 1939 to 2000. Postmodern literature serves as a reaction to modernist literature and the radical change the world underwent after the end of World War II. Postmodern literary writers come from all across the world At the core of modern literary writers' imagination, there is a belief that the world has fallen apart. It also implies that literature should serve to reveal the world's absurdities, paradoxes, and ironies. Leading authors of the postmodern literature are Samuel Beckett, author of The Waiting for Godot; Harold Pinter, author of The Caretaker; leading poets of the postmodern literature are Philip Larkin, James Heaney, Ted Hughes. The 20th century literature genre of fiction. Many works published in the 20th century were examples of the genre of fiction. This designation includes the crime novels, spy novel, fantasy, and science fiction. A.C. Doyle wrote Sherlock Holmes, genre spy novel. J.K. Rowling wrote the highly successful Harry Potter series that is popular both in children and young readers, genre fantasy. J.R.R. Tolkien wrote The Lord of the Rings, genre fantasy. These are 9 periods of English literature. The English Renaissance period represents the movement of Romanticism. The 18th century literature represents the movement of Classicism. The Romantic Age represents Romanticism. And the 20th century literature represents Classicism. Today's quote is: to see a world in a grain of sand and heaven in a wild flower, hold infinity in the palm of your hand and eternity in an hour, by William Blake. Thanks for watching. Please like and share my video and subscribe my channel. Take care of yourself. Allah Hafiz.